we've relied on these neighbors and these allies in the North just as recently as 2022, 2023, in order to conduct missions that we were ostensibly supposed to undertake. So we aren't prepared to operate in the North. We once were, but now we don't even have the simple capabilities to retrieve scientific moorings.
Now, never in the history of publishing has a book been more prescient or fortuitous. Polar War, Submarines, Spies and the Struggle for Power in a Melting Arctic by the American war correspondent Kenneth R. Rosen was published on Thursday this week, just as President Trump was mulling over the possibilities of annexing Greenland by force. Such a possibility could hardly have occurred to Kenneth while he was planning the book, but the supposed reasons for Trump's appetite to own Greenland were all there in place. The melting Arctic has indeed allowed an ice-free passage across the very top of Russia, while there has been evidence for some time that Putin is building up his fleet around Murmansk. I'm delighted to say that Kenneth Rosen joins me now. Kenneth, many thanks for joining us. A good week to have published your book, you have to say.
I agree, Rod. I appreciate it. And I did not foresee the news coming out of Washington this week, but I will say that after covering the Arctic and the circumpolar North for the last 3 years and traveling to all Arctic states, it was inevitable.
Yeah. Do you think that what Donald Trump has been saying has a point to it, which is that basically the NATO countries, the European NATO countries, Germany, France, UK and so on, haven't taken seriously the threat to the Arctic and that the USA needs to do something itself?
Yes and no. I think historically, since the Cold War, those nations, much like the U.S. itself, has not taken threats to the circumpolar North seriously, to their Arctic regions, the way they should have. However, since the first Trump administration, when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo introduced the idea of militarizing the North to the Arctic Council, those nations, the Nordic nations, the Scandinavian nations, the UK included, have taken steps to bolster their defense systems and troop presence in their Arctic territories. It's actually ironic that the U.S. would be saying this when it has let its own Arctic infrastructure fall apart and degrade over those many years and has not put in the effort to bolster its defenses there.
Oh, that's interesting. We never consider that. We're always wrapped up with our own failures on defence, our failure to pay more than 2.5% of GDP towards the NATO costs and what Donald Trump has argued. How badly has the US allowed the degradation of those forces up in the Arctic?
So let's use an example of a story that I recount very briefly in the book of an American icebreaker that was sent to go retrieve moorings in the Bering Sea, just outside of Alaska, off the coast of Alaska. These scientific moorings were to provide invaluable information about the way the circumpolar North was changing, the way the Arctic ice was shifting and melting and thawing over the past 2 years in around 2022. The icebreaker left port in Seattle, Washington, which is, as you might be aware, not anywhere near the Arctic, and was unable to reach those moorings. So the U.S. government had to call Norway to send an icebreaker from its northern territory across the Northwest Passage through the icy waters of Canada, with the sea ice coming in over the winter to retrieve those moorings for the Americans. I mean, we've relied on these neighbors and these allies in the North just as recently as 2022, 2023, in order to conduct missions that we were ostensibly supposed to undertake. So we aren't prepared to operate in the North. We once were, but now we don't even have the simple capabilities to retrieve scientific moorings.
That's remarkable. I mean, and has that degradation, the short funding, occurred under both Democrat and Republican, or is it one party which is more culpable than the other?
So it's an interesting question. I think it is in part funding issues. I think the U.S. Coast Guard, which is the primary military arm, it's under the Department of Homeland Security, but it's a primary military arm that operates in the Arctic, does see cuts in funding all the time and has changed its plans for building polar security cutters over the last 10 years to extend the program by another 2 decades. But in part, it's also because of recruitment issues. People don't want to go work for the U.S. Coast Guard. They don't want to be stuck in the Arctic. And that's something that we're seeing more broadly across the armed forces of the United States.
Well, it's interesting. The world has changed. Climate change has altered the way in which we look at the Arctic. There is now a passage, isn't there, effectively across the top of Russia that previously didn't really exist.
Well, Rod, I could tell you that they're really working to open it up, but Western sanctions have been keeping commercial vessels out. Russia and China have been working together to open up Cold War era bases that dot the coastline along Russia's northern littoral with the Arctic Ocean. They've also opened up liquid natural gas facilities in order to facilitate exportation of other energy sources. So it is a potential source of commercial travel. However, it's sort of a thorn in the side of the Western states who want to operate there because of the contentious relationship they have with the Kremlin. However, South Korea is launching a boat that will hopefully traverse that passage, which would cut the current time from the Suez Canal from East Asia to Rotterdam by 10 to 14 days. So potentially something that could be seen in the future, but as of now, it's just not feasible for many nations that would be willing to use it.
There are plenty of Russian subs around, aren't there, hovering on the outskirts of the Arctic. We've had them in our own waters here, and of course have seen what happened when Donald Trump and the British seized a Venezuelan vessel which had been reflagged as Russian. How heavy is the Russian presence stretching from Murmansk down towards Iceland and Greenland? Is it a threat? Is it something we should take very seriously?
I can't speak specifically to submarines themselves, but I do know that the Koala Peninsula up near Murmansk, I point to the map that I have on the wall next to me, is where one of the largest cities, the largest city in the Arctic is positioned. Murmansk has a population of 250,000 and also contains the Northern Fleet, as you noted, of the Russian nuclear forces. So that's been a bastion defense for the Russians for decades, since the Cold War, throughout the Cold War. And there is this understanding between UK security planners and US security planners and Icelandic security planners of the GI-UK gap, or the Goot gap,
Yeah.
which is an area of water that runs between Iceland, Greenland, and the UK. And that is not as heavily surveilled as many military planners and NATO planners wish it were. So there is a threat there, and there needs to be more security and more vessels and patrols through these waters that aren't there now. Maybe that's something that President Trump was trying to get at, but I don't think he's too concerned with allies' own defenses, but more so the Americans.
Well, it's certainly true, though, isn't it? That as you alluded to, really, in that short story about the icebreaker and the moorings, that Norway, Finland, and Sweden have all boosted their defences in that area quite substantially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Right, and Rod, you'll remember that Finland and Sweden had acceded to the NATO treaty not that long ago, a couple of years ago, right? And this filled in a major planning gap within the NATO northern defense structure. Now that those pieces came into play, the NATO Arctic defenses is much more homogenic. It's also much more collectively considered because the Nordic countries consider themselves as like a home defense system for themselves and spread that out. So now that they're able to work together and plan together for offensive and defensive military operations, they're much more stronger than they were 3 years ago. And the U.S. is not anywhere a part of this other than, I don't know, a training mission here or there.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And just finally, we used to think of war in the Arctic as being centred somewhere around Little Diomede and Big Diomede between the USA and Russia. It's kind of shifted east, hasn't it, towards Greenland, Iceland, and the Kola Peninsula, rather than that particular section of the Arctic.
Right. I think if you look at the way Russia is testing the defenses and offensive capabilities of Western nations, you'll note that the Chinese and Russian navies do patrol the Barents Sea off the coast of Alaska, as you mentioned, Little Diomede and Big Diomede.
Yeah.
However, they are really doubling down on gray zone tactics on the borders with Finland and Norway. sending drones over to see how far they can infiltrate the country before they're spotted, and also inundating the countries with migrants in order to hopefully destabilize those countries. So they really are testing different areas of defense, and Svalbard, also off the coast of Norway, remains a
Yeah.
concerning point of contention.
Wonderful. Absolutely fascinating stuff, Kenneth. Thanks ever so much for joining me to talk about it. That's Kenneth R. Rosen, and his book, Polar War, is available at timesbookshop.co.uk, where Times Plus members will enjoy a 20% discount on that and thousands of other titles.